Well, welcome everyone to today's Superintending Payments Workshop. This is Brian from Strategic Treasurer, and we are pleased you could join us today. Our panelists for today are Nithai Barzam, CEO of nsKnox, Brian Anderson, Partner Sales Manager at PaymentWorks, and guiding us through today's event are Paul Galloway, Senior Director at Strategic Treasurer, and Craig Jeffery, Founder and Managing Partner of Strategic Treasurer. Welcome, Nithai, Brian, Paul, and Craig, and I'll now turn the workshop over to you.
Thank you so much for joining us today, whether it's your morning, afternoon, or evening. Thank you for taking some time. When I say some time, we have 3 hours together to cover a significant amount of content on the topic of superintending payments. How do we manage payments effectively? And what is this superintendent role that we're talking about? We have a lot of good content. Brian, Nithai, and Paul will probably share a little bit more information about them through a more wholesome introduction. But I wanted to spend just a moment prepping us for our time today. I would encourage everyone to pay good attention through the whole time. If you keep a window open for taking notes, that's probably the best way to maintain attention through the discussion. There's going to be a variety of things that we cover. But let me go through our agenda with the other caveat that sometimes it can be tempting to start answering emails, but that gets you off track very quickly. So to the extent that it is possible, and if at all possible, stay focused throughout the time. We do have 2 breaks that are scheduled between sections. Our agenda is laid out here. We're going to be, we'll have 2 sections between 3 sets of 2 sections with 2 breaks. In the beginning, we'll talk about foundations for superintending payments, where all of us will cover certain topics, including the complexity of payments, going through fraud challenges, controls, including some survey results that we have. There'll be a full question in that section as well. We will then shift over to what we call perspectives, and this is where we'll have a fintech perspective. We'll begin with PaymentWorks and go through some payment use cases. This is very instructive and helpful. And I've asked Brian to share some real examples and some helpful examples that will help people understand what goes on. And so you'll see and hear from the perspective of PaymentWorks. Then we'll have a break. And then our next pair of presentations, Paul and I will cover the superintendent framework. What are the essentials of a superintendent of payments? What does that mean? What does that cover? Why is that important? How can you make that a reality in your organization? From there, we'll turn it over to Nithai for protecting payments. He'll give a perspective and case studies. He'll outline some of the different services that are available generally by different providers, but also some of the specifics of what nsKnox offers. And so a playbook for defense will be shared, which I think you'll find is extremely interesting. Then there'll be a short break, time to refresh your coffee or caffeine or non-caffeinated beverage. Then we'll go into two roundtables or 2 panel discussions. We'll begin with a speed round about the future of payments. What are things looking like? How does that matter? And then we'll go to a little bit more measured pace on the superintendent mindset in a complex world. And then we do a quick wrap up at the end. So there's a lot of information to cover and a significant level of information that we'll be touching on. But that's our agenda for today. So we'll continue on. I'll also mention that people should feel free to type questions in the chat box. We'll take those to the extent possible in line. And it's a great way to have a dialogue on the topics at hand. So given that, we're going to advance our conversation and begin with superintending payments, which is, I'll call it 1A. So on this, as we talk about superintending payments, what's a superintendent of payments? That seems like it's an odd topic. For those who are used to educational system in a number of countries, including the US, there's usually a principal who is in charge of the particular school, and then there's a superintendent over maybe multiple schools, multiple areas. The superintendent doesn't teach all the classes. They don't clean up They don't provide security. They're not driving the bus, and yet they have responsibility to make sure that everything functions properly. So there's a shared delivery of functionality for a superintendent of schools, and then there's some ultimate responsibility to make sure it happens versus nobody's responsible for every piece. So with that, we would say the superintendent of payments has to make sure that all those things operate, though they may not be in charge of IT. They usually aren't. They're not in charge of AP all the time, though they are sometimes. They are not in charge of accounting or rarely in charge of accounting or the controllership function. And yet these areas relate one to another. So what does a superintendent need to do? And we'll have a diagram to help explain the concept in a moment. But if we think about who's covering strategy, risk, and control for payments, this almost always sits with the treasurer or treasury. So which banks are we going to work with? How do we make those decisions about which vendors to use? AP may have drivers, payroll may have things that drive them. Treasury is always involved to some extent. Sometimes can say no, and sometimes is a great supporter of that. So there's a number of people that are in that role. What happens when new payment rails come up? Does that fit a particular business model or need? They can add new risks, do faster payments, create faster risk or more rapid risk. How are we controlling things as we look at new payment rails? And I think all of us have seen many, many new payment rails come out over the last 3 years, new payment formats. And how is that handled in an organization that may not have seen many changes in payments over multiple decades? The other aspect of payments is visibility. We have to see where payments are coming from, certainly where our cash balances are. We have to be able to see and have visibility to every payment flow across banks, across borders, and beyond. And so too, control, security, and governance has to keep pace with speed, with new payment rails, and a myriad of payment flows. So who is looking out for the control across the board? Everyone has a role, but is there plausible deniability where you can point the fingers at? Treasury did it. That's AP. Payroll doesn't know what they're doing. IT should have controlled that. However, when something happens, there tends to be this pointing the blame somewhere else. I think it's very important that everyone should understand their roles and how those are coordinated. So governance has to keep pace with speed. So that's the general or initial introduction. I wanted to show you that in a chart because I think everyone understands the education mindset using the superintendent of schools, but the superintendent of payments, just going to point out a few things here on this chart. We can see human resources handling payroll in the middle with the green option. We see treasury handling investments, debt obligations, oftentimes making tax payments. Then we have accounts payable handling all of the vendor payments that exist, invoices, managing that type of activity. Those tend to be the areas that initiate payments. There can also be a benefits group that could be separate. There could be various admin areas depending on the type of organization you have. But these green rectangles, these green areas can be numerous. On the left-hand side, you have payments. It could be a treasury management system, a payment hub, an ERP. Could be third-party providers across the board. There can be a range of what systems payments are flowing through, starting or ending the destination. We didn't list all of them. We just listed a few to start. What are the other areas involved in payments across the board? Well, controllers is usually charged or directs people on the reconciliation front, bank reconciliation, subledger to general ledger account reconciliation, and some of the accounting designations. So they're involved to some extent on payments on a recording standpoint, generally. Smaller organizations, they tend to have a more active role. On the information technology side, who handles transport security? If you're sending files, how is that secured while it's within the organization? Is it encrypted? Is it tokenized? How are things moving? How are we protecting information? keeping the information itself safe while it's at rest or in transit, and then network security, the overall framework for protecting external actions, as well as ensuring that we have the segregation of duties and can implement the principle of least privilege. And the principle of least privilege is where we don't grant IDs or people access to more things than they need. And therefore, if they're compromised or their ID is compromised, nobody can gain more access than would be necessary. And so that's a protection area. At the top, and the superintendent of payments, and this is strategic treasurer's position, is that there has to be a superintendent of payments. We believe that for organizations of a certain size and larger where you have a treasurer, the superintendent of payments is the treasurer. In small organizations, you may not have a treasurer, as we see that in, commercial and corporate sized clients, but that principle holds. So who comes up with a payment strategy? What new payment rails may exist? That can come from treasury, it can come from other areas, particularly if it's a faster payment rail, and that's really crucial for the type of business you're in. It can touch on areas of compliance. How do we comply with different sanction filtering? How do we comply with new payment formats or new formats that exist and new methods of providing security? On the payment security side, or finishing off payment strategy, I also listed bank relationships. Anybody making payments, most organizations need access to their banks for advice and certainly for capital. And so bank relationships always factor in, or almost always factor in, to discussions around payment strategy and how that fits with the overall corporate strategy and the treasury strategy to ensure adequate liquidity. And we will cover this in more detail later, but I'm trying to give a fairly in-depth review at the beginning. And then as we get towards the end, we will spend a little bit more time on this as well. On the payment security front, there's structures. How do we set up our banking cash flow to detect any anomalies that could occur to ensure that cash is managed optimally? People and training, making sure people are trained on security, on payment security, and then from a services perspective, what are the necessary services, either from their banks, from third-party providers, like the two we have on this workshop that we're doing that together. On the execution side, how do we generate these files, make changes? There's a number of services, controls, and systems that are involved. So our view is the superintendent of payments would be the treasurer in most organizations, would help oversee and provide guidance on strategy, security, and execution, even though they don't handle all the security. Every area has responsibility for security. They may oversee pulling together the strategy, though every single element of strategy doesn't fit in that area. And then the execution side and the process and controls, there's certainly a lot of involvement there. So I know I said a lot already, and I will keep our discussion moving to the modern payments landscape and bring in Paul, because this is the intro section where we're talking about what are the foundations. So Paul, maybe you could cover some of the key elements on what's happening today in payments.
Yeah, thanks, Craig. I don't need to go through the list of what the items are here on this slide. I think people generally know some of these newer payments and ways to make payments. But what I wanted to focus on is speed and fragmentation and a couple other notes. So, with this ability to effectuate payments at a faster clip, there's clearly a need for more real-time security along with faster payments. So faster payments, you got to have faster security. When we think about fragmentation, in particular with cross-border payments, the regulations in different jurisdictions can be a challenge. There's higher fees and hidden fees with cross-border payments, slow settlements when it comes to using intermediary banks, maybe a couple places that it has to stop before it actually makes to the final destination. So speed and fragmentation tend to be a challenge that we see with the payment landscape, but that's not the only area. So when you think about embedded payments and user experience, organizations are making user experience better with their platforms, the ability to make payments on the platform, to continue to look, browse, find information, or continue to shop for some end users. But there's this challenge of maintaining security around data information. I know personally, I've had letters come through over the past couple of years that my data has potentially been part of a breach. So organizations have a lot more challenges with protecting end user information when it comes to payments. Of course, there's the increased sophistication of fraudsters. Used to be, check fraud, wire fraud, ACH, but and they were using less sophisticated tools or approaches to getting access to cash from an organization or individuals. And now they're starting to use technology against organizations. They have chatbots, they have deep fake technology. They're using this and deploying this on a regular basis. They're attacking, and it can be 24/7 that this is occurring. The other challenge that we see in the modern payment landscape is around regulation and compliance. We've seen some recent changes and requirements, banks wanting more information on the payment files, addresses and other information that is needed to complete the transaction, the bank address information, the organization address information. We've also seen changes with NACHA, as well as recently the bank compliance requirement by SWIFT for the ISO 20022 file format. So we're starting to see continued upgrades and changes in the modern payment landscape. And with that, I can turn it over to PaymentWorks to talk about fraud.
Sure. Excellent. Good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. As mentioned, I'm Brian Anderson with PaymentWorks. I'm the partner sales manager here, responsible for some of our strategic bank relationships. And what I thought I would do, just level set real quick on who we are. I recognize we may not be overly known, and we are a cloud-based identity platform for business payments, serving as that front door to your ERP. Through us, you're able to automate your vendor onboarding and updates. You transfer your ACH fraud risk and electronic payments through one of the largest networks of authenticated payees. You can see the stats, different things on the screen as far as who we are. Basically, all what this underscores is we know a thing or two about vendor onboarding, the inherent risk associated with it, and what it can mean both to the buyer and supplier when it's compromised, as well as when it comes into the complexity of payments. And so just, and actually I think I'm going to speak to the importance and complexity of the payments, and then turn it over to Nithai to talk a little bit more around the fraud piece. But payments are going through one of the most significant changes in a period of time we've seen in decades, as was mentioned. Yeah, the introduction of new payment rails, new messaging standards like ISO 20022 that was mentioned. You have an expanding ecosystem of banks, fintechs, and payment platforms. But the shift really isn't just about speed and technology. It's about trust and identity in that payment process. The real shift, as payments become faster and more automated, that window for fraud detection or errors gets smaller. And that means you as organizations need stronger controls earlier in your payment lifecycle, especially around verifying that vendor identity and validating those payment instructions. And at the same time, you can't lose sight of the fact that every payment represents a relationship with your supplier, your customer, or your partner. If onboarding is too complicated, or payments aren't reliable, it directly impacts the vendor experience and ultimately the supply chain. So the challenge for you in Treasury today is balancing those three things: the speed, security, and supplier experience. And you need to succeed and treat payments not just as transactions, but as a combination of data, identity verification, and relationship management. So we see I just want to talk about four things around the complexity, data, and vendor identity. As mentioned, payments are no longer just transactions, they're relationships. Every payment represents a relationship between a company, its suppliers, partners, and customers. And a payment failure, delay, or fraud incident doesn't just create operational problems. It can damage supplier relationship, customer relationships, and impact your supply chain. The payment landscape continues to expand rapidly. Payments used to be dominated by checks, ACH, wires over the last decade, commercial card, but now you have a growing ecosystem of real-time payment rails, global networks, and emerging digital payment infrastructure. Each rail has different speed, costs, risk, and data capabilities, which means you have to actively manage a payment orchestration and decision-making. And you today as treasurers are managing a portfolio of payment rails, not just one or two options. Vendor identity has become foundational to the payment security. We know today vendor impersonation, payment redirection fraud is rampant. And it means you as organizations must treat vendor identity verification and bank account verification as fundamental payment controls, not just operational checks. And the real challenge is, how do you verify that identity without creating unnecessary friction for your legitimate suppliers? And then certainly faster payments increase the need for stronger validation. Real-time payment rails are changing expectations around speed and availability, but faster payments reduce that window to detect fraud and errors. And this makes pre-payment validation around that vendor identity, that bank account verification, and payment approval flows even more important. And speed really removes that recovery window, so verification has to happen early in the process. And the fastest payment in the world is still the wrong payment if the identity behind it isn't verified. And because of this, and you mentioned some of the new rules coming into play that I just want to hit more quickly. And so we all should be familiar with the new NACHA rules coming into effect for the large issuers that went into effect this month. For every other originator, it's going to go into effect in June. And it's really having to deal with these false pretenses. And false pretenses, it doesn't matter if it's social engineering, vendor impersonation, business email compromise, executive impersonation. It doesn't matter the how. It doesn't matter if it's a spoof, an email compromise. It's all about tricking someone. It's social engineering and the outcome of the event. And that's where NACHA has, from a US perspective, has put in the rules and really shifting that ownership upon us as originators to be able to verify and know who we're paying, and be able to have not only a policy, but procedures that help create a risk-based process for us to be able to identify ACH entries that may be initiated due to fraud. And it's something to keep in mind just real quick here before I turn it back over. Policy sets the expectation, but procedures are really what makes it happen. And are you adhering to those? And so it's important that those are documented, those are audited, those are tested to ensure that you're truly protecting yourself. And whether that's with an ACH payment, an RTP payment, a cross-border wire, any type of payment you're making, to be able to have those robust procedures and controls. So Craig, I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Brian, and thanks too for PaymentWorks for underwriting this workshop. Really appreciate it, and the quick overview. Now we're going to shift over to nsKnox. So Nithai, if you want to come on screen, feel free to share your screen. Looking forward to hearing about fraud challenges. We all want to defeat it. It's a big issue, so maybe you can talk us through it.
and hopefully it works.
It is.
For
It's looking good.
challenges for superintending payments. Wonderful. So first, a quick introduction. I'm Nithai Barzam. I'm the CEO at nsKnox. My background is actually in mathematics and computer science, and spent many years in cybersecurity first, but fintech later, which is pretty good because nsKnox is a bit of a hybrid between a cybersecurity and a fintech company. We do provide cybersecurity solutions, but our focus really is on B2B payment security and compliance, founded by the smiling gentleman you're seeing here. Got back into the news recently when CyberArk was acquired by Palo Alto Network for 25 billion. Maybe that's why he's smiling. We are SOC 1 and SOC 2 certified, so pretty helpful when it comes to processing payments and stuff. And because the problem we're solving is industry agnostic, as you can see, we serve clients from all industries and pretty much varying sizes, and some of them transact domestically in the United States, many of them transact globally. I wanted to touch a bit about the challenges with fraud, which I'm now titling kind of like the perfect storm, and when complexity meets speed. So the area of payment fraud, the baseline for us is out there, and everybody's dealing with this for many, many years. And for starters, we're dealing with fragmented workflows. Many of you have multiple disparate systems. It may be at vendor onboarding portals, ERP systems, treasury management systems, and sometimes multiple instances of each of these. Not to mention the processes related to onboarding new beneficiaries or vendors, modifying their banking details, approving payments that are related to treasury payments and AP payments, and so on and so forth. Very fragmented and complex to start with. Secondly, we talk about execution, which is distributed oftentimes globally. A lot of companies have global teams, multiple regions, multiple countries, and definitely affecting payments that are targeted at different accounts in different jurisdictions, different countries around the world, through a pretty complex web of banking partners. So all this is making things, much harder to control. Obviously, the manual process gaps. I think things are getting better over the years. We're seeing less reliance on manual verification processes, manual management processes, but still a lot of different handoffs. A lot of stuff is happening in emails and outside of systems, a lot of text messages, a lot of phone calls, which lend themselves to errors and to fraud. And not to mention that sophisticated fraud is with us for quite a while, pretty much titled that cyber-enabled fraud for the past few years, and fraud throughout the entire procure-to-pay journey, which we'll expand on, later. Interestingly, and my colleagues here talked about how things have been changing, and so I think all the problems that you guys were facing for years are now compounded by speed and AI. So everybody talks about money flowing at the speed of light, real-time rails such as RTP, FedNow in the United States, others. Globally, API connectivity just means that money moves much faster than before. And Craig, I think you said faster payments means faster fraud, and I concur. The immediate settlement actually means that we've lost the safety net, or the window to recall transactions. We affect them, the money is gone, and if we paid a fraudulent account, too bad for us. And then the last aspect of recent changes is AI-powered fraud. So everybody talks about the effectiveness and cost savings related to AI. What happens with cyber fraud essentially is that generative AI and deepfake practically weaponize cyber criminals, and they can now do so much more, so much better, in a much more effective way and much, much cheaper. It's almost like a superpower, and we'll discuss some examples later. So in terms of, your mindset, the evolving superintendent mindset is you guys need to have machines to fight machines, because the speed we talked about breaks the legacy manual controls. So human callbacks and visual spot checks, they're easily deceived and defeated by Gen AI, shouldn't be used anymore. The standard segregation of duties, having it is wonderful, but don't think if you have that, you're covered because it always fails with bad insiders, God forbid, or when credentials are stolen. The batch processing safety nets or the recall windows we talked about, both Brian and Craig mentioned, so I'm not going to do that. In turn, what you should start thinking about is being proactive. You don't necessarily need to have things in real time, but definitely need to do things ahead of time and use technology to do that because of volume, because of speed, and because of certainty. You need to be continuously monitoring. It'll be a real bummer if you verified things in the input to your systems and then they were manipulated later and you actually affect payments to fraudulent accounts. And lastly, make sure you pre-scan your transactions before they leave the house. So that would be my kind of like quick introduction. Looking forward to seeing everybody again in more details as we progress, and handing it over back to you, Craig.
Excellent. Thanks, Nithai. We're going to continue the foundations for superintending payments, the importance of complexity of payments.
Just wanted to touch on payment security. I think this is an area where we're going to see continued change and need for change. I think what we've heard so far is the use of technology to fight fraud is certainly needed. So how do we frame that up in terms of being the treasurer being the superintendent of payments? Well, the first area is around policy clarity. You need to ensure that when you write your policy or the way your policy is written, that it clearly defines, who can initiate, who can approve, who releases, who modifies, who touches those payments. Do you have the right segregation of duties, the dual controls? Your policy will help guide you in terms of what that clarity, is needed for payments. So one thing you need to make sure you're doing is that you're reviewing that policy on a regular basis. Account rationalization, and so I like to use the term maybe optimization versus rationalization, but it's this idea or concept of, do you have the right number of accounts? Are your bank accounts structured in a way that it helps limit exposure? It reduces complexity and provides more visibility and controls around how payments are being effectuated, how receipts come in, how disbursements are made, and where the concentration of cash resides. So this account optimization, I think, is an important part of your payment security, because if you don't have the right controls and visibility in place, it leaves gaps and potential for something to slip past in terms of fraud. Bank tools, a lot of your banks today provide fraud prevention, whether it's pay, match, positive pay, or other tools that are available. Make sure that you're utilizing your bank tools because they're there to help you protect payments. Things like multi-factor authentication, not only for signing into a platform, a bank portal, or a treasury management system or other system to effectuate payments, but the multi-factor authentication for approving payments, so that you have something where there's that additional layer of control. And so this would be for all payments, all systems, all rails where the payments would be initiated and approved. Then payment anomaly monitoring. So this is really important, especially around the concept of the faster payments, which is here. You want to have real-time alerts. You want to be able to have visibility to the activity that's occurring so you can pick up something. And speed is certainly of great importance when it comes to a potential fraud scenario where cash may have been taken or potentially taken. So having the ability to keep up with the speed of payments is really important. And of course, the last component is training and awareness. You need to have training on a regular basis. And we recommend at least annually. Not only are you training your folks, but you're testing them on their knowledge, ensuring that they understand what the training is saying to them. And then, of course, in between annual trainings, anything that comes out in terms of a fraud that's been committed or a potential fraud, if it's something that's new or something that's happening out there, you're seeing this happen to other organizations, or it's perhaps a white paper or some other kind of communication that's come out on fraud, just making your people aware of what's going on in the current markets can be really beneficial. So with that, we would like to move on to our survey results. And Craig, this particular one right here, this is from our flash survey, right? I hadn't seen this one, so
Yeah.
but anyways, so this right here, what I wanted to kind of point out with this particular slide is the gap between the current state and the optimal state. So we can see that a lot of the current state is residing in that Treasury handles payments and may secure the bank partners. In the optimal state, you would see less of that particular anomaly and more on the superintendent of payments, more of a strategic leader. So it's this idea or concept of they're still doing the blocking and tackling when it comes to payments, but they're more of a strategic player in terms of guidance that they provide to the organization, the tone that they set. So they lead instead of just block and tackle and do the day-to-day activity. And Craig, I didn't know on this that there was something else that, from a standpoint of the trends that we've seen over the past several years to where we're at today, and what you see in the future.
Yeah, in terms of your peers who are everybody who's on this workshop, your peers believe that the superintendent role is becoming more important. We've seen that over time. This is the first time we've asked this particular question in this particular way. And so we can see the expectation is that it would be more optimal to be the superintendent of payments, a strategic leader for payments. Really interesting, I think. And this survey was started and completed within the last week. So we can't get any more current than that. But that's, just emphasizing what you said.
Yeah, on this slide here, what was, surprising to me on the survey results was around the 42% that answered the question no stayed the same. So responsibility for payment strategy really hasn't changed. I guess it kind of falls in line with the prior slide, but there's still, a pretty large gap there in terms of Treasury's responsibility for payment strategy. Although there has been, some increase on that for sure. It seems like we'll see that gap close and we'll see more of the yes increased. At least that's what I'm predicting.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good point. The yes increase. So, 5 out of 9 companies said that Treasury's responsibility for payment strategy increased. 42 are stable and just a few saw it decrease. So it's definitely moving in that direction, which is which is interesting. So that's aligning. It at least aligns with what our recommendation was ahead, and I'm kind of glad that it did since we ran a survey on that.
Yeah, no kidding. On this particular slide, when it comes to formal authority over payment strategy, I think we're seeing either between shared with other departments or centralized by Treasury. I think Treasury definitely has some influence there in terms of the strategy. So, this seems to be trending in a direction that I would expect. Um, Craig, with the shared with other departments being nearly half, but Treasury obviously has some influence there.
Yeah, that whole idea of who's ultimately responsible for it is one of the questions, right? Who's the superintendent? Everyone has shared responsibility to some extent, but is there a formal authority over payment strategy in particular? And so this is where we see it's there's either general influence of 21%, 44% share it, and 1/3 have it centralized under Treasury.
Yeah, this one here, I think there's a little more fragmentation with a couple of these items, but let's focus on the FX cross-border payments. It tends to be when it comes to these types of payments that Treasury has a lot of responsibility, and then a third of the rest of the respondents, it's a little more fragmented. On the payment security, with this, I think between the shared and Treasury, that makes up most of the payment security. That seems to kind of track with what I would think. Now, when it comes to domestic payments, this is a lot more fragmented. So there's a lot less influence that Treasury tends to have on the domestic payment side. And I don't know if it's just slower to catch up with, what's going on in other areas, but it certainly seems on the domestic side, less influence, less responsibility from a Treasury standpoint.
Yeah, AP leads, right, 35 to 27% in terms of the direct responsibility. It's this plurality play. When you get to payment security, essentially the majority is Treasury, right, at 50% or evenly split across all the other areas. And then when you get to the more risk-oriented or FX areas, that is certainly falling in Treasury space. So yeah, really interesting to see that. I don't know how that ties into other people's experience, if that aligns with what you've seen when you talk to your friends or other areas, but we'll just continue on with the payment rail adoption.
Yeah, payment rail adoption, it's no surprise that larger organizations tend to be further ahead on the adoption side of things than medium to small. So this really kind of played out the way I would expect it to see in terms of where adoption is heavier.
Yeah, excellent.
The one point I think on this one, when it comes to security services, is that the large organizations lead in all areas except for the banking structure and concentration method design. Um, this is actually, in terms of everything, small, medium, large organizations, they tend to be in the same level. I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, I'll give everybody just a moment to look at that, and we'll invite Brian to come back on screen and cover some more. So everybody who took this flash survey we did, we really appreciate it. You'll get this information. Really great to see how companies are shifting, changing, and what's occurring. But right before we do that, we're going to take the first poll question. I'm sorry, just you can share your slides. Paul, I'm going to stop sharing. You can start sharing, but I'll just give some instructions for the poll and the quiz. How is payment execution currently structured in your organization? Are you fully centralized under Treasury, mostly centralized with some local execution, mostly decentralized, fully decentralized or unsure? So go ahead and answer that. You hit the submit button and we will be good. So, and Brian, you can begin sharing it. We'll leave this up, and as soon as we see the results, I may say a word or two, and then you can begin on the payment use case. I'm really looking forward to your section there. Right, 28, 42%, mostly centralized with some local execution. Some good stats. We'll share that with everybody, so you can see that. That'll be in the deck. You can compare that to the other results and just other information that you find useful. So Brian, thanks. Looking forward to payment use cases and the view from PaymentWorks.
Absolutely. Great. And good morning, afternoon again, everyone, evening. I want you to take a little bit of a walk with me as we get into these payment use cases optimization. And I want to start up at the beginning because really any process that requires security and accuracy requires standardization. And you think about it, if you get a passport, everything that goes through to get a passport, there's standardization requirement. When you think about your local, your state, DMV to get a driver's license, they have standardizations across that state. It's not like you move from one county to the next or drive from one county to the next and you got to take a new test and go through from that standpoint. And as we think about payment optimization and what goes into payment optimization, the very first thing that has to happen before even a payment can begin within a corporate setting is that vendor has to be onboarded into your ERP. And you mentioned before, it's often a fragmented process. There's multiple groups involved. For many organizations and companies out there, this remains to be a manual process. It's error prone, it's risky. If you go out and Google vendor onboarding forms, you'll see a number of different forms that are asking for different information. These forms are handwritten, sometimes they're typed, they can be emailed, they can be faxed, believe it or not, that still happens, and it could be snail mailed. We can see this one from the Office of Financial Management where it says right on the form, do not staple. And this is sensitive information, it's important information that is being handled in an unsecured manner. It's having to be rekeyed. The information, particularly if it's handwritten, having to be deciphered as far as what that means. Being able to then enter it into the vendor master record of your ERP in order for you to be able to start processing those invoices and POs and getting payments approved and getting that payee paid. And so not only is it burdensome and complex, which, for those of you who are involved on that, on the call today are very much aware of, it also creates a pretty big risk event for your company. And as we look across, our vendor network and changes, what we see across a typical company is about half either don't have a change or go inactive. So a pretty low risk area. But it's the other half of the pie that is creating that risk, that is impacting your payment optimization and is creating a lack of controls and visibility for your company. And we see about 20 to 25% of new vendors will be added each year. And then our 25 to 30% will have to make a change. They've changed their state of incorporation. They've changed their physical address, a remittance address, or they've changed their bank account information. All these events here that happen on the right side of the pie create a risk event for you. Also creates an opportunity for you to be able to drive some payment optimization. And the reason why this creates a risk event is for the new vendors, you don't have a really strong relationship with them. And so you got to build through and work to get their identity, collect their information, verify their information. And so you're doing that to ensure that you are doing business and sending payments to the right entity. Same thing with changes and updates. When a change or update comes in, you need to make sure that that person that's bringing in that change to you is authorized to do so, and that they're providing clean, accurate information. Kind of take it a little bit a step further as you're trying to move over to electronification and maybe move over to ACH for the account verification for these new vendors or vendors wanting to change over to ACH. How are you handling those? And there are a number of third-party account verification services in the market, and the struggle is it's not complete coverage. It means you don't use it because you do need it, and it's important to be able to figure out if you're doing this manually, leverage tools out there that are available. But what we see with a very popular service out there is about 50% coverage. So of those changes or updates to account information, you're able to use a third-party database to make that verification. But what happens to the other half of those? And how are you verifying that? Are you following to phone verification? Well, where did you get that phone number from? Is it a confirmed number? Are you calling a landline? Are you calling a burner phone? Are you calling a mobile phone? Are you recording that call to prove you verified the information? Perhaps you have insurance to help prevent against fraud. Well, that insurance company is going to want to see that you followed the procedures within your policy and you're able to prove out that you followed those procedures. And so as we look at the automation and optimization with that, as you're looking to fight fraud, we see there are 4 key pillars for a truly lockdown process. You really need to have 4 layers of defense as you're going on this journey to be able to not only onboard your vendors, but also be able to move them into an electronic payment method and drive into some, efficiencies from an operational perspective. And it all starts with identity verification. It's at that user and entity level. Are you doing the address validations, with USPS, the phone verification that I mentioned? Who's the registered owner of that phone number? Is it a burner? Is it a landline? When it comes to TIN verifications, you need to validate those out to the IRS database to ensure that at the end of the year, you're issuing a 1099, everything is clean and accurate on that front and avoiding a Reg B violations. And then certainly there are sanctions and watch lists. Global, national, state, maybe a particular industry requires you to validate against a particular database. You then look at screening and analytics. The flagging the unusual activity. Where is the change or setup requests coming from? Geolocation. When you're getting an update or change from one of your payees and they're based in Greensboro, South Carolina, is that request coming in from Thailand or from Germany or from Brazil? How are you having that scrutiny around high-risk payments? And high-risk payments doesn't necessarily always have to mean dollar amount. It could be the type of entity or the type of payee that you're paying. What is your risk tolerance within your profile? We talked about account verification on the previous screen, matching those account details to the legal entity records, confirming those bank account information. This is probably one of the pillars that you have most influence over and working through within your current capabilities. And then the final step is just around payment monitoring. That real-time monitoring to ensure appropriate controls have been applied. And I spent 2 decades at JP Morgan in a variety of roles. And so I'm going to just put a PSA in for my former banking partners. We know the banks provide the payment monitoring as well. They will pause a payment, they'll reach out, they'll call you. Sometimes it can be annoying, can be disruptive to your day, but I assure you that's in the best interest of your company. There's something about that payment that is giving them pause to want to just reconfirm with you to make sure that everything has been verified, validated, and is accurate before sending that on. And so while it may be a little bit of an interruption to your day and maybe a little bit of headache, it's nowhere near the level of headache as opposed to if that has been paid out to the wrong entity or to a fraudster. So again, where we sit and as we're coming along this journey, as I mentioned, any process that requires security, accuracy, and consistency requires standardization. And so one of the things that we see with being able to not only provide that security, that accuracy, but also that drive to payment optimization is allowing the payee to have control over their profile, to be able to share their credentials with their buyers, and to be able to have those already automated authenticated and validated. And so this here is just a screenshot of from our platform, that payee profile. They're able to manage their company information. They're able to manage their legal information that's been verified out to the IRS database. They're able to manage their account information, their remittance addresses. They're able to share that information with their customers and have that centralization across invoices and remittance and statuses. And so it creates, and back when I mentioned around our network of authenticated payees, it becomes this essential passport ID for that vendor to be able to share with their buyer so they know everything is verified and validated. And they're also able to, drive, to electronification. And so how does this work? And when we think about, again, getting into the optimization, it's, are you taking a systemic approach or an episodic approach? And currently, a lot of areas, a lot of companies are falling down under the episodic work stream. They're focusing at the time of payment or after payment and trying to get the vendor converted over to another payment type. And that's a natural course for the banks and your banking partners and some fintechs out there to focus in on, all right, how do we convert them over into a payment network, convert them over to an electronic payment, virtual card, maybe it's a ACH with rebate type solution, or just general ACH as well. The problem is down here on the episodic side, your vendor has already been onboarded, they've already been paid, they have very little reason to have to re-interact with their buyer. And so that's where you see, only a portion of your vendor database being serviced to be able to be optimized, to go through and really not achieve that full optimization. But when you make it a systematic approach or systemic approach up at the very beginning, so back to what I mentioned that you all are very familiar with, the very first thing you have to do for that vendor before you pay them is you need to get them into your ERP. That is your system of record. That is the lifeblood to your financial operations. Everything happens and flows through your ERP. And so when you're bringing that vendor in to that ERP, you're bringing in their name, their TIN, their corporate address, their remittance addresses. You're collecting certificates of insurance. You're having to verify if there's any conflicts of interest. Well, at that time, that's the optimal time to be able to present and share what are your preferred payment types to that payee. Because that payee has a reason, has a rationale to be able to have to interact with you. They know they have to provide all this other information in order to get into your system, in order for the invoices to get paid and for them to get paid. And so when you attack it on the front end from a systematic approach, you're solving for all your vendors, all your new vendors coming through, vendor changes. You have a lockdown standard process to be able to capture all the information you need to ensure from an entity and identity validation, but you're also capturing for preferred payment type as well. And so just to kind of take that just a step forward from that systematic approach up front, as I mentioned, you're capturing the tax information, you're capturing all the address information. This is all being verified, validated, and then you're able to present to your client, your buyers, your payees, how you would prefer to pay them, and you can show them whatever your preferred terms are. So for this one example, the client virtual card is very important. So they were listing that first as a recommended approach. It's pay upon approval. So you have some terms incentive there. And then you're able to build out around, other payment types. If they don't want to take the virtual card, well, what's your next? Do you want to have ACH? Maybe you want to be able to have them an early pay, an accelerated ACH type offering that brings in terms enforcement, but also brings in the opportunity to be able to speed up their DSO. And should they, want to be able to take a slight discount on it. And again, everything that is presented here, and as you work on that strategy, helps drive to that optimization. And and so as you're going through, we know that not all vendors are created equal. Not all payees are created equal. You have one-time episodic tail end payees. And then you have your really strategic suppliers, your strategic vendors, those that are critical to your business, to your supply chain. And each one should be treated differently, and no different when you're looking at payment optimization and how you're going to pay those vendors. Certainly, applies based on where they fall and how important they are to your company. But the part I want to call out too is, and think back to a couple slides ago where I was talking about the systemic versus episodic. Traditionally, you're focusing down on the episodic, focusing on, hey, who's already been paid. And a lot of the times you're focusing in on the tactical suppliers, maybe some of the strategic. But it doesn't necessarily always focus in on the tail end. Well, one of the things that we see when we do analysis and we see across our clients' portfolios is 50 to 65% of their vendors are going to fall into that tail end category. They're 1 or 2 time payments. They're less than $25,000 a year. They're probably going to be on check. Maybe a one-time payment, non-PO, you have a P card, but largely this part of the population is ignored. And what happens within the episodic world, and you're focusing in on less than 35% of the vendors, is you have a failed payment optimization program, because over half your vendors, and granted they may be low dollar transactions, but it's a higher volume as well, are not being optimized over to an electronic payment type. And so by bringing in a systematic approach, tackling it from the very front end of your process, again, all the pain, the effort, everything that has to go through to get that vendor in. But if you're targeting it up there on the left side, you're then able to drive your strategy across your entire segmentation of your vendor population. So appreciate you. And just the last thing, just around that strategy planning, it's got to be a collaborative approach between you and your banking partner as you're working on that strategy. Scrubbing the data, having the right contact records, the messaging, and that segmentation, and determining, okay, who is the bank going to reach out to? As mentioned, most of the time they're going to be going after those tactical strategic suppliers, pushing virtual card or push payments or closed loop network, and it's going to be periodic. Now, maybe a quick rapid transformation because they're going to target a subset of vendors to really push and get after there. But again, for everyone else, like, how are you handling that systemically? Focusing in on those tail end suppliers who are out of scope for a virtual card or other revenue generating payment type, or even suppliers who may decline it. And so that becomes organic, but also continuous onboarding. And you're able to then, over time, really be able to transform your payments and transform your payment strategy and transform your operation, your operational benefits and returns as well. And so just, as we look at, and this doesn't, apply to just one particular industry. So I grabbed a client out of, one of these 6 industries, because as you look at that importance of a systematic approach, as you look at the importance of doing that right supplier segmentation and building that strategy around, as well as having that, standardized onboarding process, that lockdown controlled base process for visibility, for approvals, for verifications, validations, you're able to not only optimize the payments across your vendor platform, an AP platform, but you're also able to provide and bring in that risk and controls that you're looking for. And so you can see, just a couple of them, call out, this higher education provider, and this is over the last 12 months. They've onboarded a high number of payees, over 15,000 payees, and they were able to get it to 95% electronic adoption between ACH and virtual card. But they were also able to, and this was in partnership with us, we were able to stop 6 fraud attempts for them. The other item I want to call out too is just around the construction company. For those of you who work in construction or maybe have to pay different contractors, it's a very difficult industry. It's a heavy check industry, but it's also an industry that faces a lot of fraud attempts because of the manual disparate processes. And this company was able to, by putting in the front end onboarding and focusing on a systematic approach, they were able to have fraud stopped for them. They were able to achieve almost an 80% electronic adoption rate, which is really high within the construction industry. And so I share these with you, and again, just here to show some of the pie chart on the adoption across different companies. But by having a policy and procedure in place, by focusing in on the front end and having that standardization and driving things through, and really working on the payment type and payment verification, validation, and identity verification, validation on the front end, really helps unlock the value within your AP process to drive towards those electronification and drive towards the payment types that you want to promote within your company. And so hopefully that provided you some insights around optimization, some ways to think about the optimization as well, and maybe some challenges that you have currently today. And as you work across the different organizations and departments within your company to be able to help drive through and realize the success that you need to be able to not only match where payments are heading today, but be able to do it in a controlled and successful manner.
Thanks for talking through the process and also that view of segmentation. Payments are complex. There's different types of industries. So I liked how you broke out the approach might look different for different segments based on size or number of payments, and for giving some of the use cases and case studies of results in different segments. And so, yeah, anybody's invited if they're interested in detailed sales and demos to contact nsKnox or PaymentWorks for the different elements. So thank you so much for that, Brian. We are at the point for the first break. We will take 5 minutes. We will be back at 45, quarter till the hour. We'll start right on time. We're going to go through the framework essentials for payment framework. That'll be Paul and I will be up on that. We will see you in 5 minutes. We'll start promptly. Welcome back. We're moving quickly. Thanks to PaymentWorks for that prior session. After this next session that Paul and I are doing, we will go into protecting payments by nsKnox into some more detail. So this section, we're covering the superintendent framework. What's necessary for that? And you've seen this picture before. You heard me explain it before. So this is going to be a little bit of review. I'm not going to go over it in complete depth. We'll get into what makes sense from an area of oversight and beyond that. So let's get started. So we have the same chart that you saw before. So this is not new, shouldn't be considered new now that you've heard it. But this idea of payment strategy, payment security, payment execution, Treasury has a huge component and responsibility for making sure that happens, particularly with strategy, making sure that ties with what they believe the organization needs to do, how the organization can be supported by different payment rails. And Brian had shared different payment rails from card to ACH to wires, et cetera. When we look at payment security, one of the biggest gaps has to do with people training. Now, Paul had mentioned training of people on security, but we want to be even more specific and say the need is for training on payment security, not just cybersecurity. There can be some overlap. You certainly need cybersecurity training for everybody in an organization. But for those involved in the payment process, payment security training matters because people are the primary area that the criminals are getting past. They're using them to get in the organization. So superintending that has a key aspect of how we secure the payments and the execution. And part of that is we went through the complexity of there's more payment rails, You may have new requirements. Brian spoke about new notch requirements. Well, if we look over time, there have been many of these payment rails where no changes have taken place for a long time, some for 30, 40 years for the company that's originating payments. Now, if you look at payment card industry data security standards, which would be card payments, there's been about 2 decades where requirements have been placed on companies that accept cards to protect the data. And so every year there's attestations that need to take place now over a 20-year period. If you look at SWIFT customer security program, for those who are connected with SWIFT, for about a decade, there's requirements, similar type of requirements to protect the messaging network called SWIFT across the board, from the surface areas of attack to how you're custodying banking information and validating activity. So that's been about a decade. And then if you look at ACH, for those who have low value payments in the US using the ACH network, they go back about 7 years, and these requirements have started to spill over and impact originating customers. It used to just be for the originating bank. So if you send a payment into a bank, or you send instructions, NACHA records into a bank, they would have requirements. Now those requirements extend much more fully to receiving depository financial institutions as well as originating organizations. So when you initiate a push payment or an ACH credit or a pull payment or an ACH debit, you have responsibilities. Now those responsibilities have to be updated, usually twice a year. There's usually something in the spring and something in the fall. This has not been the case over the 50 whatever years for the ACH network. This is just a way of saying that's another area of compliance and activity that's going to exist. So when we look at this whole flow, there's lots of other systems. You could have nsKnox in here, PaymentWorks, two of your banks, et cetera. There's lots of ways payments start, payments end, payments are delivered to the banks. But payroll or human resources, treasury, AP, and other areas are all part of this. And so superintending payments ensures that everyone's not only doing their respective part within the area, but are participating in the overall payment process for efficiency, the use of capital in a well-controlled manner. So Treasury is not going to be responsible for information security or network security. That's going to be IT or IT security. They're not going to be responsible for all of the reconciliation functions. That's going to be controllers or controllers pushing it into a particular area. But across the board, superintending means to ensure that those things get done and get done in a reasonable manner. And given regulations, compliance, and fraud are all increasing, the defenses and the methods of complying with those is greater. And that's a huge area that we have to focus on. It's more complex, there's more things happening, and so we have to be more organized, requiring more diligent process and requiring a superintendent of payments to take place and to organize, if you will, the teachers, the bus drivers, everybody else who's involved in the schoolroom, the equivalent in an organization. So we're going to shift over to continue our discussion by looking at the superintendent framework. What are some of the areas of oversight for the superintendent? One is the infrastructure. How are you connecting to all of your banks? Are you connecting through host-to-host, SFTP, or APIs? Are you connecting through another provider? Are you going through a bank portal? So looking at how that connection works should be solved for the organization in its entirety, not on a fractured or fragmented basis. You may have 5, 10, or 15 areas that originate payments in some way. Should they each solve those problems on their own, or should you have a structure and infrastructure that supports that? So integrating into systems, you can think of tools like third-party providers, you can think of payment hubs, and across the board, there's a number of different tools. We're not trying to get into the entire universe of tools that exist, but certainly you have one or more ERPs that would generate payments. Treasury has responsibilities. taxes, making payments, but having the infrastructure in place matters and fits into a good, well-managed payment framework. If we move down to the left-hand side, you can see cross-border and FX governance. Now, you saw the recent survey where most organizations said this is the responsibility of Treasury to handle cross-border FX activity. And that's the vast majority of organizations see that. So that tends to be a natural area where people are looking for Treasury to handle that. But there's other elements of that. How do we make payments across borders? We have exposure to different currency pairs. As things move on, Treasury should be looking at how to resolve that, whether those are for acquisitions of other entities on a deal basis, or whether that's paying suppliers or receiving payments as well. And managing cross-border payments and ensuring that's governed well has aspects of where is our cash around the globe? What currency is it in? When is that happening? So making sure cash is where it's needed to be at the right time. And that also fits into some of the structural considerations. So we talk about banking network strategy. What banks are part of your mix? How do you design your concentration system to support good controls, effective accounting, ease in dealing with your trading partners on the outbound and on the inbound side matter. So that's always, if your organization has FX activity, that's almost always in the domain of the treasurer's group. And we would say that should be something that's explicitly stated when you talk about Treasury as superintendent of payments, and how does the organization handle that? And if there's no Treasury, it would be another group who's acting and covering those roles would hold that title or that job description of superintendent of payments. If we look in the upper right, we've had all three companies have spoken about this so far, about security and controls. This is something that needs to be standardized across the organization. And we'll talk about a few things in detail, like where are your points of exposure? Almost everyone knows the main flows that exist. You have to make sure that those are covered, but usually organizations will identify about half the flows, the payment flows that they have, when they think and they try to list them. And then as you go and you explore, you find that, oh, there's 3 other areas here, 2 other areas that occur this way. Someone else is using a portal that we didn't know about. And the expectation of 25 different payment flows becomes 50 or 55. So that's a key area on the security and controls, understanding the full inventory. How is that segregated? The duties are segregated. Are you putting the right structures in place? And the principle of least privilege, making sure that IDs and people can do what they need to do, that there's adequate backup, but that the permissions are not promiscuous, that if someone gets control of an ID, they can do everything that could possibly be done without segregation of duties or without being able to access things they shouldn't have control over. The other area there is fraud detection layers. Now, both nsKnox and PaymentWorks have security features that exist. Your banks have security features that exist. So fraud detection layers, or layers where fraud will be detected, layers that provide security that they have to be defeated, are vital. And so the framework should be, you have all of the appropriate layers and you're protecting each of those layers. Criminals try to get past those layers. One of the ways to try to get past that is spoofing people, getting people to remove those layers by a sense of urgency, or a sense of, oh, the CEO is asking for this and it's okay because they're asking for this, but it's not the CEO. So having the layers and protecting them needs to be part of the framework, the mindset, and the training. Finally, on this section, the 4 that we're talking about is policy and accountability. So there should be a framework for protecting payments, a framework for making sure payments are efficient, and assigning specific accountability even when there's some joint responsibility, having specific accountability really helps. So that should be documented, not wrapped up in someone's head, but written down. How do you escalate if there's a problem or if there's needs to be something accelerated? What is the path for that? And that's where the issues can exist. And finally, the defined ownership. Extremely important that we define who owns what part, who's the superintendent, who's accountable for different pieces. Being a superintendent, again, does not mean that you have to make sure that the firewall is updated every day, but that should be part of the framework that exists, that IT is making sure that's updated. There is a way of ensuring that that is happening, and that would be crucial. So framework, policy, specific accountability, and checking those things matter. So those are 4 key areas of oversight. They're not exhaustive, but that's a very good place to start. As we continue on there, Brian, I'll invite you to come on screen as well and talk about immediate payments.
I think it's supposed to be me, Craig, so I'll go ahead and jump in on immediate payments. And, we talked about this earlier. You heard several of us talk about the speed of payments and the ability to control those. So, you have to have faster fraud detection or fraud or process in place, whether it's systems that you're utilizing, technology, you got to utilize that to help you detect anomalies quicker, the ability to have real-time security. When you have faster payments, the immediate settlement, it reduces the ability to recall the payment. Checks, wires, ACHs, even ACHs, you have more time to recall those transactions. So having the ability to recall is reduced. And we're seeing for a lot of organizations out there, people want to execute transactions 24/7, 365 days a year. The demand to make payments has increased. So platforms and systems that organizations have made it easier for organizations and people to engage in those transactions. We're more of a global footprint in terms of our economies. They're starting to mesh and spread. And so that requirement continues to increase, or it's there for a lot of organizations, especially larger organizations, medium-sized, smaller businesses, perhaps not as demanding, but there's certainly the demand to be able to do transactions at any time during the day. So what's this mean for organizations that are trying to manage their liquidity? Because if you have immediate payments or faster payments, you got to be able to have the cash available. This requires better forecasting, better visibility to what's available, and ensuring that you have cash in your accounts prior to these transactions going out the door. It can't be instant. If the cash isn't there, it isn't available. Or if you don't have a liquidity lever that can be pulled to cover the payment as it goes out the door. So you've got to be more proactive on your forecasting and your liquidity management. And of course, the fraud detection. This is where you want to be proactive, not reactive. We talked about having the right bank structure in place, the use of technology to help you detect something that is out of the ordinary. It's going to be imperative that you have things set up and framed up so that you can be proactive versus reactive. When it comes to faster or immediate payments, being reactive, you're too late. things have already crossed the finish line and you don't want that to happen. So you got to be proactive. We have a list of some questions, that you can ask yourself, where should real time be enabled? And what transaction types qualify for immediate payments? Are there dollar limits that should be applied? After hours monitoring, how do you handle that? This is where having the right policy in place will help guide what kinds of transactions you would engage in for this real-time scenario. Your technology can help you with the after-hours monitoring, so that you can have that 24/7, 365 availability, and certainly setting limits to the amounts that could go out the door reduces the risk of a large financial loss in the instance of immediate or faster payments. So these are questions that organizations should be asking themselves when they're considering or engaging in these immediate payments. With that, I think we'll move on to payment supervision playbook, I think, or no, excuse me, cross-border payments. That's the next section. So we talked about some of the challenges to cross-border payments. Organizations that are trying to transact in different countries and deal with regulatory compliance, multiple layers of staging payments, foreign currencies, to get it from company A to company B. These are challenges that are faced by companies that do global business. And so the complexity just continues to accelerate. There's varying bank file formats, clearing systems that the payment has to go through, and there's different time zone cutoffs. So a payment that you do here in the US to Asia or Europe or other locations, you have different time zones, and so there can be cutoff mismatches. So trying to manage that can be quite a challenge. There's currency volatility, as well as regulatory challenges that can trap cash. So you don't have access to cash that you would need to complete a transaction, or the ability to get cash where you need it when you need it. These are all complexities that add to challenges with cross-border payments, and a need for supervision along the way. Treasury can play a critical role in that area. So what are some of the oversight priorities? One is visibility to your currency positions by currency, by bank, by account, by legal entity. You have to have the visibility. There are tools and systems out there that can help you manage that. When it comes to FX execution, the strategy and alignment, that is an area where you've got to take some time to ensure that you understand what's going on in the foreign currency markets, as well as cutoff times to be able to effectuate transactions that you want to do cross-border. There's also cost transparency. When I think about some of the challenges I had as a practitioner with foreign currency, dealing with Japanese yen was quite challenging for me to be able to get US dollars converted and delivered in Japanese yen was a challenge. And I had to recognize that and know ahead of time, okay, what are the costs that are going to be associated, the fees with executing that transaction. So make sure you know if you're doing a payment from Europe to Asia or elsewhere, that you understand what costs might be associated with doing that, because there are costs. And it's, something that's in addition to just the FX rate exchange itself. So you've got costs with the FX rate and any costs that might be deployed by a particular country that the cash is being converted and sent to. Then there's balancing centralized versus decentralized execution, whether it's done through a particular hub or whether it's decentralized in the sense that maybe you have a global footprint and you have treasury teams in local locations that are executing cross-border payments, just understanding the balance between the two and what that impact might be, with controls and ensuring that you have a clear understanding of what it's going to take to get it from company A to company B. And with that, now we can move to the payment supervision playbook. And I'm going to talk to the left side of this slide, and then Craig's going to come in and talk to the right side of the slide. So we have a lot of clients in the past that we've done payment security assessments for. And when we do that, we map all the payment flows across the organization. And so we take a payment flow from initiation, what happens at initiation, all the way through to reconciliation. So everything that transpires between that payment being initiated to the reconciliation of that transaction. And so we're looking at the controls in place for initiation, approval, delivery paths. Are they secure? When it gets through to a bank, that process along there, what's happening from the bank to the payment getting sent out and the information coming into systems back into the organization. So we like to map those flows and understand them from start to finish. We identify all the payment rails, and there's a variety of payment rails when we go into this. I think organizations don't realize how many different payment rails they might have or be utilizing in the different types of payments that are being transpired across the organization. So it's important to identify all those as part of the mapping process. And then we talked about document the control gaps and the redundancies, whether you have something where something should be done and it's not being done in terms of your process, or you're doing something that you could be doing just once, but instead you're doing it twice and it may not be needed, or that you have something where it's not in place and it needs to be in place so that you have a secure payment flow from initiation all the way to execution of that particular payment. And with that, I'll turn it over to Craig to talk about the right side of this.
Yeah, I'm going to start on the bottom right side. So conduct an annual payment risk assessment or payment security assessment, because that's a lot of what the left-hand side is. You have to have a full inventory, as Brian mentioned, of every single payment flow, not just the material payment flows, because every flow represents a risk. But no less frequently than annually should you do a payment security assessment. We think you should do at least every third year with a third party. Now, of course, we do that, so I'm not trying to make a pitch to do it every year, but I am making the statement that you should have someone else take a look at it every 3 years, at least. And then the other 2 years, maybe you do that internally. Look at every single payment flow, understand what has changed. Have you made changes to protect those payments to make them more efficient? And you take a look across all of the payment flows. Oh, there's a new compliance standard that's required. You need to do KYC or sanction screening, or you're trying to better solve your vendor change information or manage that. And so now you're setting up with an outside provider, or you're pulling in data to help you do that. That annual risk assessment or payment security assessment is something that needs to be done. And I would, if you're taking notes, go ahead and put that down on your note as do it every year, at least 1 out of every 3 years, have someone else look at it. It's surprising how much you find out when someone asks the questions where there's an assumption. When you look at your own stuff, you make assumptions and usually things that you assume are wrong. There's enough elements of what you assume are wrong because someone changed it, but they didn't announce how a process changed. The top element on the right, define real-time payment criteria. Anytime you need to pay something faster, we can say, why do we want money to go out faster? You don't want money to go out faster. But there are certainly use cases where speed matters. There's probably no cases where paying, where speed is, things are slowing down. You want to make sure you're applying the right situations and the right environment for using something that's faster. And the faster payment doesn't mean a hasty review process for how payments are made. That's where you run into the problem. A hasty process results in bad fraud. A faster payment process by itself doesn't mean fraud is faster. If it's fraudulent and you haven't provided the proper controls, it will be an issue. So define that. Speed matters. Things are getting quicker, and making sure that the process is both locked down from a security standpoint and efficient. Those two elements are really helpful for your playbook. The one in the middle on the right is probably the hardest. And there was a question that came in that said, can you talk about your experience and how Treasury can bridge the gaps between reality and ideal scenarios when the seats at the table are guarded with egos and politics? And I'm sure there's some stories behind that, for sure. I did want to say something about that. So a cross-functional payment governance group, if you're the superintendent of payments, how do you make a pitch that it's not like, hey, we want to control everything? I would say you have to define, what does Treasury do? What's its role in helping the organization? And people can make fun of statements like, what's the Treasury vision? What's the Treasury mission statement? But if you look at what's the vision to ensure these things happen, that the liquidity is provided for, payments are protected, there's adequate capital, relationships are managed in a way to support the overall business, et cetera. That has to be translated to different areas. So one might be cash. What's the view of Treasury for cash? I would say Treasury is the owner of cash. That means they manage the bank relationships, access capital, decide what accounts can be opened. They support operating efficiency through those accounts. They're not trying to break it, but they're making sure that it's well controlled. And so all of those things sit under owning cash. If we look at payments, I would say Treasury should be the superintendent of payments. What does that mean? They ensure that everything gets done in the organization without having direct responsibility for the individual items. That would mean security. That would mean making sure that the payment rails that are being used support the business, that it provides for the capital that's necessary, that operating business supports the bank relationships, that the work that they do and the third-party relationships provide appropriate security or greater flexibility. So let's say you're making a lot of different payments. PaymentWorks showed, here's a bunch of different payment methods. Well, instead of treating everything as a completely different process, it becomes a selection criteria. So some of that factors into how do we make our payment process efficient as opposed to completely fragmented. And we might have different segmentation strategies on it. So here's what superintendent of payments means. What's IT responsible for? What's Treasury responsible for? So establishing a cross-functional payments governance group means people are going to ask for things on the payment side that you may not like, but you need to adapt to and make sure that it fits with what the organization's doing. But it also means, in addition to supporting the overall needs of the organization, not necessarily exactly aligned with your priorities, but making sure your company's not solving things 10 different times. How do we do sanction filtering? Oh, we'll check it for this one AP system. We'll do something different for this other AP system. Treasury will use something entirely different. And then vendor validation services. We're going to use, this area is going to call, this other area is going to do something different. So a cross-functional payment governance group will help communicate what's necessary for efficiency, to support the overall organization, to provide proper controls. That gets everybody aligned with the right KPIs. That is the way where the ego can get slowed down, because otherwise it becomes you're trying to gain control, and it's, superintendent doesn't mean you do all the individual functions every area, but making sure that people are accomplishing what they need to. And there's a lot of wisdom and a lot of insight and a lot of mistakes that have been made that can and should be shared. And so pulling people together in that role matters and matters greatly. Another question came in. Do you think the 4I principle is best suited for policy and accountability? I think 4I principle is best suited for process, but that segregation of duties, the 4 I's or 6 I's, depending on what it is really suited well for providing control and making sure that there's some way to put a break on activity that might not be right. And so I'm trying to answer that question there. So with that, we are now going to shift over to our next poll question, and I will invite Nithai back on the screen, and I'm going to stop sharing the screen. There's a poll question up. Everyone is invited to answer that, or encouraged heavily to answer it. The first question is, which statement best describes your organization's current approach to payment fraud prevention technology? There's a list. Go ahead and select it. Select the one that provides the best fit. The second question is multiple choice. You could select 1, 2, 3, 4, however many you'd like. Which areas of payment supervision do you plan to strengthen most in the next 12 months? So there's options from real-time payments down to other or ensure. The comment, sometimes the vendor gives you bad information and will verify the bad information. Thank you for that, Holly. Then they're kind of stuck, right? Let's see. And I'm sure both our partners on this event are going to like it. Less than 30% are using a third party for bank account pay validation. So there's room for that. 12% assessing technology. And then 44% are doing manual controls and callback procedures. This is really escalated in companies because of fraud, and it tends to be very inefficient. So that's usually an area to look at to see, if you're doing one a year, maybe you don't need to worry about that. But if you're doing, dozens a month, it can make a really significant difference. Plus, there's the risk side of that. So that's really good information to see. And which areas of payment supervision do you plan to strengthen most? Real-time payment controls, that's number 2. Number 1 is fraud prevention, security controls. I'm not sure that shouldn't be 100%, but there I go with my opinions. Number 3 was staff training, team capabilities. Very good. This is a very good list. Nithai, I know it's a little bit later in the day for you, and I really appreciate it. So I'll invite you to kick off protecting payments.
Happy to be here, and hopefully what I cover now will be interesting for the audience. So hi, everybody again. Doing what I do, I speak with a lot of finance professionals in different companies and in banks all around the world. And I wanted to share some perspectives on payment security. Obviously, that's what we do. I'll start with fraud attacks and provide some real life examples. We'll then move to try and understand our enemy, what they are, how they operate, and finally introduce the playbook for defense, which will touch areas such as infrastructure, process, and people, and tools. And then I want to cover quickly a case study of implementing our technology, which I'm hoping would still be useful for everybody. All right, so when we talk about the basics of payment fraud, I think a lot of you are pretty familiar with that, but still some statistics to go out there. The AFP has conducted their survey and have reported that 83% of large enterprises are experiencing payment fraud. If you're smaller than that, then you're slightly better off, but you're still at pretty significant risk, not too far from that. There is an estimate from the Association of fraud examiners that around 2% of overall revenue is being lost to fraud annually. And this is a bit mind-boggling, I think. And when you look at things, hey, can I suffer 2% of my revenue being lost? Maybe some of you will answer yes, but if the average is this, what can a single incident do? And we've seen incidents in excess of $100 million being lost to fraud, and some of them were reported on an ongoing basis. Not to make this a detailed lesson on, how exactly everything happens, but to start touching on this and diving a bit deeper later. Well, we typically group fraud into these buckets. The first one is social engineering. Again, I think, most of you will be familiar with it. It is still the most common way for payment fraud. Started with business email compromise, email account takeover, and the likes. But as we have touched on and we'll discuss more with generative AI and deepfake AI, this is moving over to the phone and to video as well. Cyber attacks, obviously, everybody logging onto online banking receives these messages of, never share your credentials or whatever. And even with two-factor authentication, we're seeing countless cases of credential theft and use to access systems. And we're seeing cyber criminals targeting ERP systems. So malicious code that specifically targets your ERP system to manipulate data within it. And finally, nobody likes to talk about these. None of us like to think that any of our employees could be a problem, but bad insiders are oftentimes in the best position to cause trouble because they know the controls, they know how to bypass them, and they can cover their traces. So let's look at some real-world case studies around these, starting with social engineering. And the one I've chosen today is with Arab. They're a pretty large company, and the fraud case here is probably like the perfect example for what I call social engineering 2.0 attack. It started with a finance employee at Arab getting an email asking him to conduct a transfer of $25 million. It sounded a bit suspicious to them, and so they tried to email the CFO and ask for a video conference to confirm that. Obviously, email was hijacked, and a video conference did take place, but it wasn't a CFO. It was all deep faked, and the CFO and some other team members known to that employee joined the call. None of them were the real person. All of them were avatars. And of course, they gave the green light and the funds were transfers. It took about a week until the employee actually contacted the real CFO to find out that this is 25 million too late. So this is a critical case, right? In this example here, systems were not hacked, but reality was. And so the deepfake AI risk is real. The second example involves a cyber attack. I guess, again, all of us hope and think that we're kind of safe behind, those firewalls and encryption and so on and so forth. We do hear about the occasional ransomware attack, but in this example, Stoli Group, the giant vodka provider, no reason for drinks or being happy around this case. They were hit by a devastating cyber attack, which resulted in with complete manipulation of their master data and their ERP system altogether. And at the end of the day, it resulted in with their US subsidiary defaulting on $78 million, which forced them to file for Chapter 11 and go bankrupt. So a pretty bad story. And if you look at the left-hand side of this slide, IDC have conducted a survey and have actually come up with, to me, mind-blowing results where almost 2 of 3 companies that were surveyed have admitted that their ERP system was accessed remotely by unauthorized users, which is a huge problem overall. And then the last example that I'll give is for bad insiders. Again, as I said, we typically like to trust our teams and employees. But if you look at the statistic on the left-hand side, cybersecurity insiders have conducted a survey on a threat report in 2024 and came out with, again, another mind-blowing statistic indicating that 83% of the companies surveyed have experienced at least one insider fraud attempt in the past 12 months that preceded the survey. So we don't like to think of it about this risk, but I think we have to. And the example here is from Bridgestone, and as the slide states, this is with a former assistant treasurer. Of course, it's a former rather than currently employed because this person was arrested after stealing $15 million from Bridgestone in fake reimbursement invoices and creating a fake vendor and controlling the payments that went into that source. So altogether, the three main groups with social engineering, cyber attacks, and bid insiders. So let's try to understand our enemy here, right? And we're all fighting against this. And I think one of the important ways to kind of like look at payment fraud is this is actually going through a process of industrialization, which, kind of like answers the question, why manual best practices fall against, professional fraud. And I have to say that I was, as a solution provider, I can say I was happy with seeing so many of you relying on manual controls because, hey, it's opportunity, but for the greater good, I'm actually really concerned with that fact because we talked about the speed of light, we talked about the advances in payment fraud, and, manual best practices are definitely not enough. So who's the modern threat actor, right? If anybody still sees this as a kid in a basement with a hood, it's not. These are businesses and they're ROI driven. They're enterprises. They're profitable, very profitable. They're highly organized. They operate globally. They automate their processes. They invest in technology and they have a lot of money to invest. They use AI continuously to research targets, to do things faster, to write code, to manipulate data. They allow themselves both scale and precision. So they're capable of both automated, kind of like your spray and pray type attacks, targeting all the customers of a specific company, targeting everybody around, as well as very targeted strikes on high value organizations and supply chains where they can get, the best buck for the stuff that they're doing. So if you haven't already, please recognize this is very serious. What type of weapons do these guys have, right? In the past, I think it was all about hacking systems, but now it really has shifted into hacking reality and systems combined. What generative AI have done is weaponize those cyber criminals and providing them with almost like a zero-cost superpower, allowing them to do much more for much less. I gave you the example of social engineering 2.0, so I think, no further information is required. Cyber criminals today are capable of flawless impersonation. It could be writing an email that will look exactly like you wrote it, using LLMs to write the email the right way. It could be deepfake audio and videos, and I think everybody has seen demonstrations of this. And lastly, they're not alone. They're collaborating with each other like you wouldn't believe. The dark web is full of stolen credentials, special malicious code, which they can take and reuse to compromise your systems. And how do they operate? Across the entire procure-to-pay chain. We all typically look first into how do I confirm the details when I onboard vendors or when I receive a request to update banking details? Yes, business email compromise and deepfakes are definitely targeting these first. However, they're not stopping there. They will try to attack your data at rest. So trying to manipulate data in the ERP system, like the Stoli example that we've talked about. They'll try to steal your credentials and access your ERP system and modify the changes so that you will wire the funds to them instead of ransomware attack. And the same apply for your payment cycles and payment runs. Some very specialized malware intercepts and tampers with payment files, manipulating them before they're signed and sent for processing. So overall, we're facing a modern threat actor that is very well equipped with technology to hack both reality and systems, and will constantly try to attack everybody around the entire or across the entire procure to pay chain. So how do we defend against, these guys? Well, I would like to suggest that to solve this sort of like multi-layer problem, we need a multi-layer approach. Obviously, such an approach will involve stakeholders from different departments, from IT, from procurement, not just from treasury. And yes, I've heard before, this is not easy for all organizations, and some of the people will come to the table with their agenda and their ego, and it's never straightforward to do that. I think, Greg, you were starting to allude to that and suggest that people try to change the narrative from how do we control this to how do we enable this type defense. And my suggestion to you guys would be to use kind of like this playbook, and try to position this the way your counterparts are thinking about things. If you walk into a room and be the superintendent and control things, they're going to hear you're slowing down my onboarding process if they're in procurement, or they're going to hear you're giving me more work if they're in IT. So I think try to talk to their KPIs, how you help procurement onboard faster, how you help IT reduce some ERP customization and development by implementing third-party tools that integrate quickly. And at the end, try to identify the common enemy. We're not fighting each other, but rather the fraudsters that are out there to get us all. And no department want to be part of an investigation if bad things happen. So the first layer we recommend, and again, regardless of any tools you may be using, you want to collaborate with your IT and information security team in securing your infrastructure. They're definitely the experts in technology, but you guys are the ones that are experts in the business, and you know your processes, you know the handoffs, you know the routes, and so on and so forth. And you should together look at all the people participating in the process, the systems that are involved, and focus on the handovers. We could apply a lot of security on systems, on firewall, on data, but if stuff just, moves through email, file exchange, just speaking with one another, they don't know about that, then we're not securing it. So I'm not going to get into the details of how do you secure the different components and be technical with that, but your discussion with your IT should be technical, and they should, start by hardening any computers or mobile devices that may be used in the process. Definitely introduce multi-factor authentication and VPNs. No, it's not, going to solve all the problems. We're still seeing systems being hacked with multi-factor authentication, but today I think this is basic and must be implemented. They can help secure your email. And overall, I think it's a very good first step. Everybody should do that, regardless of anything that will follow. But as the quote here from former FBI Director Mueller says, there are only two types of companies, ones that have been hacked and those that will be, meaning this is not enough. So let's move to the second layer. And this one talks about people and process. Again, not all is going to apply to everybody, but in general, I think all these are principles you should adopt. So first, try to look at the interfaces within the company, but also interfaces outside the company. For example, the interfaces with your bank. Are the banking partners you're working with, do they have the correct phone numbers, emergency phone numbers for the people that currently have responsibility to provide a yes or no answer for transfers going out? Who's authorized to communicate with the bank? Are you happy with that? Rotation of employees. If employees rotate between geographies and between positions, they get exposure to the bigger picture and are able to understand, where the risks are and how to solve them. Extremely important is the next one. Don't rush. Fraudsters will typically try to inject a sense of urgency. We must send this payment by noon, otherwise we lose the transaction. If we don't pay this vendor, we're not going to get the goods. But you must define the processes in a way that eliminates rushing things. Define them in a way that allows you time to do things. And this is where proactive activity gets into play. Next, education and training. I think Craig talked about that. I'm not going to expand on this. In old times, it was the solution. Now times, I think it's just important to include this. Centralization and standardization. I am very well aware of the fact that, this is not only always possible, especially post mergers and acquisition, multiple geographies, multiple teams. But the more you centralize and standardize, the better this will be. So try to do that. If you have only one channel to issue payments and one process to onboard new suppliers, it's much, much easier and better. And lastly, segregation of duties. Again, this is not the solve-all mechanism, but definitely a very important part of things. And you should make sure that there's no single person that can complete more than one step in the process that you have here. And by implementing some of these principles yourselves or with somebody to help you do that, you're definitely improving the situation, again, regardless of any type technology or solution that you'll choose to implement to automate things and make them even more secure. But as always, processes and control are only as strong as the people that either follow them or not. And so sooner or later, somebody will fall between the cracks. Somebody will make a mistake or be forced to make a mistake or actually want to make a mistake or cut corners. So that's why we also advocate for third-party tools. Again, the survey showed that a lot of you don't do that. Hopefully you will, because nobody wants to become a victim. If you automate using reliable and external data sources, you're dramatically reducing the chance of something falling between the cracks. Try to get the human element out of the picture as much as possible and get the visibility. And I'll talk about doing this continuously and throughout the entire process. So not only to validate your banking details when you're onboarding a vendor, but also on a continuous basis to make sure that you're continuously guarding your master data, auditing it, and also controlling your payments. With that, I'll quickly move to describe a bit of a solution suggestion and a case study. There are multiple factors to consider when you're talking about your payments, both from a security standpoint, but also from a compliance standpoint. Definitely think about controlling your outgoing payments. That's kind of like your default thought process in terms of I want to make sure that funds I'm paying are getting to the right account and not to fraudsters' accounts. But the same thing applies, right? Any outgoing problem on one side is an incoming payment problem on the other side. And you definitely want to also make sure that when your clients are paying you, the money gets to you and not to fraudsters again. And from a compliance standpoint, sanction screening is also important. When we do that, we want to make sure that the data we control is actually secured and stored securely, because manipulating the data in the solution that you're relying on is obviously problematic. And two important technology pieces are obviously global account validation and some sort of verifiable credentials that you could use to make sure that the details you're getting are indeed correct. Even if you're using like a portal to get your vendors to enter the details, you cannot rely on the fact that the details entered are correct. There are too many cases of stealing credentials, even with multi-factor authentication. So just securing the channels is the first step, but validating the data is another. In terms of a case study, I wanted to give you guys a glimpse at a company that have implemented an end-to-end solution, and this is Ansys. It used to be Ansys Inc., but was acquired by and now is a part of the Synopsys Group. They are public. They were and they are now public. They're a leader in engineering solutions and taking their clients from, design into silicon into systems. They're a pretty large company, and interestingly, they operate globally with more than 80 offices around the world. And so what they've implemented is using PaymentWorks for outgoing payment security and AP across all three modules, as well as PaymentWorks for AR to protect their incoming payments, as you can see here. And you guys could obviously look at the case study on our website. It details as how their corporate controller, who is responsible for these things, indicate how they were able to quickly see results and validate accounts in any country they operate in and continuously across the entire cycle. And they do that across their entire, all their sites in all regions. So when you look for a technology solution, what should you look for? The first thing I recommend is to be able to verify accounts globally and with 100% coverage. We've heard even today that some of the tools provide, 50% coverage or what have you. If you get used to receiving unknown from your solution, it's a bit of a problem because a fraudulent account will always be unknown. It's not in any database. So you want to be able to verify all accounts around the world, or at least around the geographies you transact in. Next, you want to verify based on banking data. I don't want to sit here and say that the banks are perfect, but I think everybody knows that the know your customer process that a bank does when they open your account is pretty elaborate. And in my mind, the best source for account ownership data is the bank that manages the account. Trying to validate based on phone calls or document reviews, if you do them or someone else does, is not good. And all it takes is one transaction to fail. So you got to get to the full coverage. And lastly, continuous validation. You want to verify the accounts and audit them throughout the entire P2P journey. We talked about the playbook for fraudsters and how they'll try to attack throughout the cycle. And to put it, simply, it would be a real bummer if you verify details when you onboarded a vendor, put them in your ERP system, but ended up paying the wrong account. So when we talk about global account validation, what are we talking about? Really, the ability to confirm account ownership for any account anywhere. And what you want to be able to do that is based on authoritative data from the banking system, not based on data provided to you by the interested party, which may be a fraudster, but rather what the bank has. Over the year, we've spent many years actually doing that and identifying the different rails and different validation methods around banks. Now, I separate validation into two big buckets, right? Everybody has a database, and maybe your database covers 50% of the accounts in the US and nothing at all globally. We have a database too. Many would say we have a network of partners and we'll integrate with and provide you with real-time data in different countries. And that's great. We have that too. Open banking interfaces allow your vendors or any account owner to log on to their online banking, and by doing so, provide you with the account ownership details to make sure that they're confirmed. All this is great, and this is in-network. But what happens when the database ends? And this is where you should be worried, because if there's nothing to take care of that out of network, then you're left with manual controls for many of the accounts. And so I'm not going to talk about this in details today, but I invite all of you to touch base with us, and happy to tell you more about out-of-network validation, but essentially the ability to confirm account ownership for any account anywhere in the world, even when it's not in the network. And our network covers, more than 40 countries today, and hits huge percentages. But I think the important thing is the out-of-network thing, which is where your fraudulent account fall. Next, I want to talk about kind of like the bank account validation challenge. I think all of us want a perfect world. We want a database that has all the valid accounts where we could just issue an API call or search with a portal and get instant result. But I think all of us are experienced enough to know that, this one doesn't exist. And so there are always a bit of a balance or a trade-off between what is the level of effort I want to make, how fast can I get the result, and what is the level of certainty that I need. And I think, and we've seen stats that Brian shared before, indicating, um, how large your long tail may be. Now, I don't want to say $25,000 are not a lot, and I don't want to say $500 are not a lot. Each of you can decide for yourselves what is your sensitivity to risk, but I think it's about risk management, not necessarily always risk avoidance. And so the decisions that you want to make for the 10%, which comprise your, largest payment, are different from the ones you want to apply to the ones that are smaller. And so the level of certainty is important to you, but not always. And that's why we offer the ability to do quick checks, quickly search in network, in our database, in partners database, and get great results sometimes. But if they're not enough, and if the payment you're making is huge, definitely use a more granular method that is able to confirm the tax ID, the name, the address, and positive confirmation of account ownership, because things are tough and just matching names is not great at every point in time. So with that, I'll end with kind of like, and yeah, that would be, I know, a bit of a sales pitch there, but happy to talk to each of you about this. I think if you talk to us, you could enjoy a solution that's truly global, able to validate all domestic accounts, and as importantly, all international bank accounts in any country. It puts you in control and allows you to choose the level of validation you need and balance between speed and certainty. Only uses reliable and trustworthy sources from the banking system, not what the vendor claims, which is oftentimes not accurate, and allow you to standardize across your entire organization.
Excellent. Thanks. Thanks, Nithai. We are going to take a 2-minute break and we're going to move into the panel discussions. We're trying to catch up a little bit on time. We've done a good job over the last hour and a half to make up some time. So we'll give everybody just a moment and refresh your coffee or other caffeine. We will start in 2 minutes. So I'll stay on screen. All right. There's just a couple of things I wanted to cover. There's a question about how can you what resources can you recommend for putting a payment security training deck for employee training purposes? I would encourage you to look at a little self-serving, securetreasury.com. We have a whole online security training. We could provide other materials if you're looking to put some of that stuff together for yourself. We can show you how we look at it broadly, and really appreciate that question. All right, Nithai, when you come back on, we can get started. Go back on screen. I know. Awesome.
Yeah,
Very
I'm
good.
here. I just didn't push
It's
the
all
button.
good.
Sorry.
No worries. So we're going to begin. We have two panel discussions in the next 35 minutes as we finish up. One is the future of payments. This is a speed round. We'll do a poll question, then we'll have a longer one led by Paul. So the rules of the speed round are the respondents, Nithai, Brian, and Paul. You can say pass, or if you answer, you need to say the bottom line answer first, then you can expound on it. I'll probably not be obnoxious, but I'll say something else to keep things moving. And I'll change it up. If one or two answers is great, we'll just stop and we'll move on to the next question. We have up to 5 areas. First is new payment rails. I'll ask the question in the form of 2 questions, and we'll begin with Nithai, then go to Brian and Paul. For the first one is, are new payment rails having a significant impact? And if so, what new payment rail is having the largest impact? Nithai.
So first, the bottom line answer is yes, they have an impact, and the shape of the impact is, I think, a massive acceleration of the risk. When settlement is instant, we're losing the traditional recall window that we talked about, I think, during the presentation. And if we, do something wrong, then we cannot recover. The money is gone. In terms of, do you want me to move to the next question?
Yeah, which rail is having the largest impact?
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I would say domestically, probably FedNow is changing the game, bringing instant payments to quite a broad range of mid-tier and regional banks as well. Globally, that would probably include SEPA, Instant, and UK faster payments that are doing kind of like the same.
Immediate payments. Brian.
Yeah, agree. They certainly are having an impact. And I think it really, where the impact is coming in is you may see some attrition or consumption around ACH or wires over to a faster payment rail. But I think what it's really doing is opening up and moving treasurers from a batch payment process to a 24/7 decisioning, which brings in other challenges with it from that standpoint. And then, as Nithai mentioned, there has to be a stronger emphasis around that prepayment control and validation because once it's gone to go through.
Yeah.
And then I guess as far as the largest impact, it is those, those faster payments, the RTP, the FedNow, even push to card has come quite a long ways over the last, few years as well. And I think we as consumers are adopting and taking advantage of it first, but as consumers, we're starting to force corporates to figure out, hey, how do you take out that friction? And I don't want to have to wait until Tuesday after a holiday to get paid. I want to get my money on a Saturday.
Right. Excellent. So I'm going to shift away. So Paul, I'm going to put you up with the next question. You'll start with the
Sure.
next question, and then it'll go to Nithai. So upcoming and emerging payment rails. I'm going to talk about stable coins, payment stable coins. When will stable coins in the US become significant and why? You can say they don't have to be significant. I'd like a timeline and reasoning. Go.
Uh, I say now. The Genius Act, I think, is going to precipitate the use of stable coins even this year. I think we're going to see an increase over time, but with the introduction of that act that provides belt and suspenders, for lack of better terms, around stable coins, I think we'll see an increase in that.
Okay. And Nithai.
Well, I think the question was significant, and so the bottom line answer for me will be 18 to 24 months. Agree that some of the regulatory clarity is evolving and will enable that, and we're seeing it starting, but I think for it to become significant will take a while. Challenges also relate to fragmentation of the different tools and solutions, I should say. But yeah, 18 to 24 months.
Okay. Nice refinement on that. And Brian.
Yeah, I think it's gonna, start to accelerate here. I think back to 7 years ago, it was February 2019, JP Morgan announced their JPM coin, recognized that's not a stable coin or a crypto, but leverage the blockchain technology to avoid and really take out the friction when it comes to international payments. And so that, has, started to gain some traction, adoption. And so I do think the infrastructure, the regulatory, the acceptance and comfort level is starting to get there for more to adopt it within their corporate payment business.
Okay. All right. We're going to start with Paul on this again. I'm picking on you, Paul. We're going to jump over to fraud and payment security. Pick one security area that needs more attention by corporates and explain why there's a gap from what there should be from what there is to what there should be and what's needed. And is it in the area of people, structures, processes, systems, or services? Go.
Yeah, I would say it's around structures. When I think about just payment flow from initiation to reconciliation, I think the structure of how all the payment flows are happening within an organization, I think that's where there needs to be more focus.
Okay. Nithai.
I may be biased, but I'll say systems and services. I think the survey results here were a bit mind-blowing to me, with a number of participants here that said they're still relying on humans. I think at an AI age and the speed of light, for both payments and fraudsters, we must fight, machines with machines.
Brian, anything?
Yeah, no, I would just agree with that. We're using antiquated technology to fight new age attacks, and these are large, sophisticated crime organizations. And so, as you look at that vendor payment change fraud and the process gaps between departments, is really where that's slipping through the cracks. They know there's too many hands in the pot and not enough process discipline.
And Brian, we'll start with you this time too. I'll just do a little bit of background for this, and you can take it, or if you don't want to take it, one of the others can take it. Fraud losses have been extremely high for large organizations. They continue to grow each year. For very small organizations, they've been fairly low, but there's been a significant uptick lately, probably due to more sophistication, more automation. When will the incidence of losses, proportionally, of course, in smaller companies match larger companies?
Yeah, I think we're starting to see that now. Certainly the smaller companies aren't going to match the loss of a larger company, but a $30,000 loss or a $15,000 loss to a small company could be detrimental. We know a lot of the small and medium businesses out there have less than 2 weeks cash on hand, and for any type of the interruption, whether that's one time or 5 times, could be detrimental to them. And the fraudsters don't care. They're going after $1,400 as well as 14 million or 200 million. It's all about speed, volume, and it all adds up. So I think we're starting to see that tipping point where the smaller companies are starting to their volumes and percentage wise are matching that of a larger company.
Okay. All right. Anyone can take this. This is about efficiency and scalability. I know we're skipping a lot of the question areas, but internal or external, like for payment validation or for outside payment processing or third-party services like account validation, some of the services that PaymentWorks and nsKnox offers. And so, Paul, you're going to have to keep them honest, right? What is the break point or rule of thumb you use to encourage companies to go to outside or third-party providers for validation services?
Yeah, I guess I can hit on that first because this question comes up quite often with clients that I talk to or prospective.
Paul, yeah, Paul, you're gonna have to turn off your video camera because it's mute. I can't hear you. It's sucking up the bandwidth. So we'll go with Nithai. You want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. I'll say right now, anybody making payments should do something. It is a break point already, and Brian, talked about it before. For a small business, $15,000 may be detrimental, and so there are solutions out there that could be acquired very cheaply and provide the added layer of security. You shouldn't wait to lose bigger amounts to use technology to prevent that.
Okay. All right. And Brian, any comments?
Yeah, and I would just add on to that. It really is, when the payment complexity grows faster than your internal controls. And certainly one loss is one too many. But as you're looking at your controls, your vendor changes, their frequency, the types of payments you're making, if you're robust enough and you're able to insource and do all these great things internally, that's great. But when your internal costs and distraction, because you have people who need to be doing more strategic analytical things, sometimes it's better to leave that vendor identity and payment verification over to the professionals.
This last question will be for Paul and Nithai. Thanks, Brian, just for speed here. It's on compliance. Name one payment compliance related topic you believe has not received enough attention or preparation from the corporate community in the past 3 years. It could be something like ISO requirements, Address changes, notch requirements, Swift CSP, go.
For
I'll
me,
say the,
go ahead.
sorry, Paul,
Go
go
ahead,
ahead.
Nithai.
So I think from my
Uh,
perspective,
I was
I'll
going
pick,
to,
Let's go with Paul because I think he's getting
all right,
delayed.
I was going to say, I,
Paul, you're
am I
going to have to
getting
come off
delayed?
screen because I cannot hear. Not hearing you.
Can you hear me fine? Okay.
Go ahead and talk.
Okay. ISO requirements for me. I think those are ones where the banks are up to date, but companies at some point are going to have to comply.
Okay. And Nithai, you get the last word on this.
I was going to say ISO 20022. I think the ability to structure data the proper way and include important data like tax IDs and vendor addresses and this sort of stuff is critical in payment security. Too many are satisfied with name matching services and validation, and everybody knows you could have two companies, same name, different states in one bank account, which will lead to fraud. So that one's the biggest for me.
So Nithai, Brian, and Paul, thank you for that. We're going to shift over to the final panel discussion. Paul will lead that. You may have to stay off screen. I'm sorry, unless you can connect to your secondary attachment. But we're going to pop up our final poll question while Paul gets ready to lead us in that panel discussion. Okay, the question, single question, but it's multiple choice. What are your biggest challenges in supervising payments today? So visibility across distributed systems down to other or ensure. And while you go do that, Paul will be leading a panel discussion on superintendent mindset in a complex world. What's going on with the environment? How do we need to think about it? So he gets to turn the tables and ask the questions. All right, we'll wait for the poll responses to come in. We'll give it a minute. And are you still
everyone
on your
see
primary
me
connection?
and
I see you.
hear
It's
me
coming
okay?
through clear. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Great.
Well, you can, if you want to go ahead, let's see, I know Brian Weeks from our side is tracking the polls. If enough have answered, go ahead and put that up just so people can see it. We'll go ahead and send it out with the deck. So thank you for participating in that. Yeah. Okay. I'll give you one moment to look at it. Number one, fraud and security risk management, 55%. Number two is visibility across distributed systems. And then it scales down from there. So staff training awareness, 36%. All right. Thank you, everybody, for answering those poll questions. That's very good. Paul, take us away.
Okay, so in this section of the panel discussion, these questions will not be rapid fire, although you can choose to answer in either short format, a little longer, or choose not to answer at all. So it's up to you whether you want to participate or not in the questions. And I'll randomly select somebody to go first and just move down the line back and forth. First area is mindset. We spend a lot of time talking about superintendent mindset that covers accountability, risk control, strategy, new payment rails, visibility, and governance. So when you think about those areas, for an effective superintendent mindset, focus on payment security, is that enough? And if not, what view is needed? And so I'll start with Nithai. I'll go to you first.
All right. So I probably should have taken the easy path and say, yes, that's the most important thing, and it'll be enough. But realistically, I think this entire session today focused on so many different areas where a superintendent should focus on. So, for intellectual honesty here, I cannot say that it's enough. It's not enough. There are definitely additional areas um, um, that needs to be taken care of around risk, around strategy, around velocity, around many other areas as well. If I take it into the, quote unquote security side of things and responsibilities, I would also probably change kind of like the wording a bit. Instead of saying is payment security enough, and try to shift this more into systemic integrity. Not just securing the perimeter and making sure, I'm not defrauded, but also making sure that, we know where things are, we know where the money goes at every stage. We have a holistic view of our entire processes and so on and so forth.
Brian?
Great. Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, while security is essential, it's not enough. Certainly bringing in, as we talked about today, superintending payments is a much broader mindset. You're taking into account, the government governance, the visibility, the strategic oversight of the entire payment ecosystem. Yeah, and I think it's as treasurers on the call, you're not only thinking about and understanding how payments support your business with strong controls and accountability, but how are you beyond preventing the fraud, ensuring secure, efficient, and payments that align with your business operations? Just because there are faster payment schemes out there, they may not fit with your alignment. Same day ACH may work just as well as an RTP or FedNow for you. So I think, yes, security is essential to ensure you know who you're paying, how you're paying to go through, but that superintendent mindset is really taking that. I think Craig did that nice overview of in talking with like a school system, ensuring everything is efficient and aligned within the business operations.
Yeah, yeah, that's great points there. Craig, anything else you'd want to layer on that?
The comprehensive look at all areas makes sense, and they provided great answers. So the only thing I would say slightly differently is that you may have areas that are weaker than others, whether like in the school, if it's the security or the bus or the teaching, you focus on the areas where you're proportionally weaker. But you have to look at all those. But you clean up don't just do leg and back day. Make sure you have your other workout days too.
Thank you. I think that was great. I'll move on to the next area, which is, changing world. We're definitely living in a changing world. So how do treasury teams maintain a superintendent mindset when there's constant change going on globally? And Craig, I'll start with you on this one.
Well, I think the key area is we call it treasury radar. How do you keep track of what's happening and what's nearer to you, what's farther away that's coming to impact you? So a superintendent mindset is what's happening in the fraud perspective and the control perspective, in efficiency, what's going on in our organization to make things better. And so that means having a regular scan, going to workshops, webinars, paying attention, maybe using third parties to help stay current on these items. That's how we do it. And that's the only way I think companies can really do that based on the rate of change that's been happening lately.
Alrighty, Nithai.
Yeah, I'll say first, accept the fact that, things are changing. Not all of us are actually accepting this oftentimes. And I think in the area of, banking systems and finance and systems in general, there have been many periods and times where things didn't really change or didn't change that fast. And it's kind of like easy to adopt the business as usual approach. And I think over the past couple of years, things have started to accelerate. So the first thing I would say to maintain the mindset is to acknowledge the fact that things are definitely changing. Secondly, I will say, you know, you must look at technology. Things are happening too fast, too many, too often for manual everything to work. And it doesn't matter if it's manual forecasting or manual FX management or manual account validation or security posture, which is, the things I would talk about forever. But yeah, you must adopt technology to deal with change.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. Brian?
Yeah, and agree with what's been said. And I just as I think back to prior to my time at JP Morgan, I was on the corporate treasury side for about 7 years. And it was really important to have people around you that were hungry to learn. You hire people who are comfortable being uncomfortable. I'm going to throw in another corporate cliche around there, but if you're not changing, you're moving backwards. But really, it's about having that hunger to continually to learn, keep informed of those new payment methods, reviewing your controls. How do you move away from being reactive to problems to being proactive? And we know your days are full, busy, but as you're looking to drive efficiencies within your organizations, it's learning how do I leverage new technologies, whether that's the developments around AI and machine learning. How do I keep abreast of new payment rails and new payment types and how that's going to work within my business? So yeah, I think the treasury teams that you hire, the people that you have, they need to be hungry. They need to know that they're going to be continually learning. They're not going to come in and do the same exact thing for this every day, day after day for the next 40 years, because the world is just evolving too quickly.
All right, Brian, I'm gonna stick with you for these next questions on maintain a mindset. What steps do treasury teams need to take to achieve superintendent mindset? And can technology help maintain that mindset? And Brian, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think certainly it starts with having that full payment environment view, knowing how your payments are initiated, approved, processed, reconciled, and having that oversight. I think one of the things that, and I'll go back to my old role on the corporate treasury side. If a new product was being launched or there was a new sales team or something happened, oftentimes they'd bring treasury in last. And we're like, well, wait a minute. No, we had to then work to get our perspective to be, no, we need to be front and center because all the cash flows, everything that's happened, we need to be on the front end of that. And being able to bring in and share that expertise, show that you're not a blocker to these new initiatives or new tasks, but be able to be additive, really help write those clear policies, have that strong segregation of duties, to be able to, monitor the ongoing activity, have that visibility, and identify, inefficiencies and risk early on. So I think, just as you're looking and being that superintendent, within your organization, and technology can absolutely have that, help with that. You really need to be able to embrace the technology, and being able to leverage tools and systems that are out there to make reconciliation easier, make processing easier, make identifying anomalies easier is all extremely important. And I think as part of that as well is ensuring that you have a clean underlying data set. Because if you got a garbage data set, you're not going to be able to take advantage of a lot of the technology out there, for straight through processing and other visibility and controls.
Great, great. Any other comments from Craig or Nithai? I mean, there was pretty good response there, Brian.
Yeah,
Yeah,
go ahead.
no, go ahead, Craig.
I think we have the exact same wait time. So no, it's technology is a key part. And Nithai had said you have to use machines to fight machines. You have to use the right structure to combat the onslaught. You need to make sure your people are trained, every element, the humans, the structure, and tech to make sure that works. I think that is really crucial. So it's strategic and it's also leverage tech. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess where you were going is kind of similar to what I was going to add on a pretty detailed response before, but I think it's, maintain the partnership within the organization, and outside of that, think ongoing, improvement. And this needs to be, across everything. So the processes, the people, the infrastructure, and so on. And I think all of us already said that technology is the only way to really scale your oversight across everything that's happening so fast.
Nithai, keeping with you on payment oversight, when it comes to superintendent payment oversight, how do you prioritize the following items, so that you have that effective oversight component? And the four areas I'm looking at are infrastructure, security and controls, cross-border and FX governance, and then policy and accountability.
So for this one, I have kind of like two different thought processes, right? The first one I think is kind of like what Craig I think you mentioned before, and it really depends on where the organization is at right now, and are you fully compliant with policies, and are you all set with security? Then maybe you should focus on cross-border and FX governance, and so on and so forth. So what is the weak point? What is the strong points? Where do you need to apply your focus? But having said that, it seems that without policy and accountability, nothing else will follow. So potentially that's a box to take first, regardless. And then, as said, right, would become directly tied into your security and controls posture, into your infrastructure, and how you modernize that one. And so it's a tough job being the treasurer. You really need to kind of like, have all balls in the air and balance your time across all these.
Thanks. In the interest of time, we got a few more minutes before we need to close and wrap up. But I wanted to do the last area, mapping payment flows. And Craig, I'm going to ask you to respond to this. Why is mapping payment flows from initiation to reconciliation important? And then how often should organizations review their payment processes and controls?
Well, the last question, I said it earlier, so I'm going to repeat it. I'll say every year it should be done, and at least 1 out of 3 years have a third party. So I'm not going to change what I'm saying. I'm sure we could hear something
Sure.
different from Nithai and Brian. But why is it important to map them from start to finish? I would say one step before that. Why is it important to have a full inventory? Because you can miss something that leaves you greatly exposed. Why do you want them? Should you map them from initiation all the way through to reconciliation? Because it's start to end. You can protect part of the payment process really well, but you left something out at the front end or the back end, and now your payment process is exposed. So going from start to finish is that comprehensive look. And that end-to-end look matters because you're protecting the payment process, not a component of the payment process. So that's why it's so important. And I think mapping that out also it's reflective of areas that might fall outside of your direct responsibility. Well, I don't do reconciliation. That's somebody else. Oh, they're doing it monthly. Is that timely? Is it going through the banking system in a way that's easily detectable? Are we leaving files that can have payment information changed in a directory that other people have access to? Or, all those areas allow you to spot where the weaknesses are across the payment process, and the payment process is what matters. That's why the whole thing matters.
Well, thanks for that response, Nithai and Brian. We've got about another minute or so. If one of you have an additional response you want to add on that, please chime in.
I think Craig hit it well. It's about, as you're mapping it through, you're able to see the process, the gaps, where things are happening within the flows. Do you have a culture problem, within your organization? Do you have people who are circumventing and cutting corners to appease others or try to make their world a little bit easier? So as you have that full visibility, oversight, mapping from the beginning all the way through reconciliation, do you have the right segregation of duties? And do you have maybe weak controls that are being circumvented, or a culture that is open to making exceptions when they really shouldn't be?
I'll just quickly add, Paul, why is mapping important? Because essentially you cannot control or improve or protect what you don't see. So this will be my bottom line summary for all that. And one quick remark on, the how often you should review. I want everybody not to confuse the review with the execution of controls or improvements. And while you may be able to review on an annual basis and so on, which I will agree with, you should implement continuously and don't wait for next year's review to do things.
Yeah, definitely a valid point there. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Craig to close this out.
Thanks. Everybody can stay on the screen if they'd like. Really appreciate PaymentWorks and Brian and nsKnox and Nithai and Paul with Strategic Treasure for your time preparing, talking, and sharing information. This is great. Thank you, each of you, for attending. I'm going to do a quick summary, but thanks for attending. You spent 3 hours with us, and we really appreciate it. There was a lot of content. It seemed like the time went fast to me. Hopefully, it worked for you as well. And to the extent that you have time to follow up with nsKnox and PaymentWorks, we encourage you to do so, to see what they have in a more detailed manner. Hopefully, as we went through examples, it at least exposed you to those companies. We appreciate their sponsorship. So everybody, we went through a lot of the changes of what's happening in payments. It's more complex. There's greater demands. There's new payment rails. There's new security requirements. There's new compliance requirements. And this increased complexity means we have to solve for that with our structure, with our third-party partners, with how we train our staff and how we approach it, from protecting payments to making things efficient. It is really important that, organizations $1 billion and over have a superintendent of payments, and that's going to be the treasure in our view. As you get smaller, there still needs to be somebody. For smaller organizations, there still needs to be a superintendent of payments. We hope that as we went through use cases, examples, and approaches, as well as our dialogue and the panel discussions, you found some things that were useful. Our contact information will be included. You'll have opportunities to follow up, separately. We want to thank you for that. I'm also going to put up a way to learn more. I'm going to put that slide up. So it's a great way to connect with each of us individually, connect with our companies, and I'll also bring Ryan Weeks back in if there's anything that you wanted to add.
Thank you, Craig. Thank you, Brian, Nithai, and Paul. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And for more on payment security, be sure to download the Payment Security and Fraud Prevention ebook by clicking the link in the chat box. Thank you, and we hope you have a good rest of the day.